The dragon spread its wings and gave an experimental flap. Two Flower stared for a moment, then clambered quickly onto the beast's neck. Soon they were airborne, the dragon skimming along easily a few feet from the floor and leaving a billowing cloud of dust in its wake. A sharp turn sent them soaring out of a tunnel mouth in the side of a vast cavern. There were rocks far below, and up above were broad shafts of light from great holes near the roof. A lot of activity on the ceiling too. As Nine Reeds hovered, Two Flower peered up. One of the shapes far above detached itself from the roof and began to grow larger. Rincewind was rocking to the distant guano-speckled rocks. His brain reeled with the thought. The words of the spell picked just that moment to surface from the depths of his mind, as they always did in times of crisis. Why not say us? They seemed to urge. What have you got to lose? Rincewind waved a hand in the gathering slipstream. Ashonai, he called. Eberis, he intoned. Urshuring Kvandi Pithan Ungarad Feringamali. As the words blazed their rainbow colours around him, he flung his hands back and prepared to say the eighth and final word that would appear in coruscating octarine and seal the spell. The breath was knocked out of him. A pair of arms locked around his waist, and the whole world jerked sideways as the dragon rose out of its long dive. Two Flower laughed triumphantly. Got him! And the dragon, curving gracefully at the top of his flight, gave a lazy flip of his wings and soared through the cave mouth into the morning air. In a wide green meadow on the lush tablelands that was the top of the Wittenberg, the dragons and their riders formed a wide circle. They were all watching the figures clustered in the centre of the grassy arena. The group contained a number of senior dragon lords, and among them were Leuk and his brother Eliates. Slightly to one side stood Eliezer and Hrun. Between the two factions stood the Wittenberg's hereditary lawmaster. I challenge you, said Hrun, glaring at the brothers, both at once. Leuk and Eliates exchanged looks. Leuk scowled. You arrogant barbarian. The lawmaster put out a blue-veined hand. As the challenged parties, my lords Leuk and Eliates have choice of weapons. Dragons, they said together. Hrun stepped back, shaking his head. Oh no, he said. I'd rather be dead than fight on one of those things. Die then, said the lawmaster. Hrun turned to Eliezer. Don't I even get a sword? He pleaded. A knife even? No, she said. I'm sorry. You're sorry? A boom of wings made Hrun spin around. Leuk's dragon was already airborne. As it swooped low over the turf, a billow of flame shot from its mouth, scoring a black streak across the grass that rushed towards Hrun. At the last minute, he pushed Eliezer aside and felt the wild pain of the flame as he dived for safety. He rolled as he hit the ground and flipped onto his feet again. The other dragon came in from one side, and Hrun was forced to take a standing jump to escape the flame. Leuk came in for a second run, but slower this time to allow for the big man's unexpected agility. As the ground drifted up, he saw the barbarian standing stock still, chest heaving, arms hanging loosely by his sides, an easy target. As his dragon swooped away, Leuk turned his head, expecting to see a dreadfully big cinder. It was Like all these imaginary burns on my arm, you mean? Just listen. Unless my brother is conscious, his dragon can't exist. It's got no pathway through this. Run! Shouted Harun. He threw her away from him and flung himself flat on the ground as Aliati's dragon thundered by, leaving another smoking scar across the turf. Harun scrambled to his feet and set off flat out for the woods at the edge of the arena. No dragon would be able to fly through there. It didn't try. Aliatis brought his mount in to land on the turf a few yards away and dismounted casually. The dragon folded its wings. I can burn you out, said Aliatis after a while. The bushes remained motionless. Perhaps you're in that holly bush over there. The holly bush became a waxy ball of flame. I'm sure I can see movement in those ferns. The ferns became mere skeletons of white ash. The dragon continued through the spinney, incinerating every likely-looking bush and clump of ferns. Aliatis waited. Harun dropped from a tree and landed running, a dead branch in his hands. Aliati's sword came up wickedly to be caught on the branch. Then Harun cannoned into him, and the two men sprawled on the ground. The dragon roared and crashed through the bushes as it tried to turn around. Aliatis screamed as Harun brought a knee upwards with anatomical precision, but managed a wild blow that re-broke the barbarian's nose for him. Harun scrambled to his feet, to find himself looking up into the wild horse face of the dragon, its nostrils distended. He lashed out with a foot and caught Aliatis, who was trying to stand up, on the side of his head. The man slumped. The dragon vanished. Harun slung the unconscious dragon lord over his shoulder and set off at a trot back to the arena. Halfway there, he found Liuk still sprawled on the ground. He stooped and with a grunt hoisted the man onto his vacant shoulder. Eleazar and the lawmaster were waiting on a raised dais at one end of the meadow. Kill, she said. Killing unconscious people is all right. Eleazar snorted. Then I shall banish them, she said. Will that satisfy you? Yes. Harun looked around. Where's the next test then? I warn you that it is perilous. If you pass, however, you become Lord of the World. Am I to be weaponless again? Said Harun. Eleazar reached up and removed her helmet, letting the coils of red hair tumble out. Then she unfastened the brooch of her robe. Underneath, she was naked. As Harun's gaze swept over her, his mind began to operation two notional counting machines. One assessed the gold in her bangles, the other was plugged straight into his libido. Both produced tallies that pleased him mightily. As she raised her hand and proffered a glass of wine, she smiled and said, "He didn't attempt to rescue you," Rincewind pointed out. He clung desperately to Two Flower's waist as the dragon circled slowly, tilting the world at a dangerous angle. In front of them, the Wurmberg hung against the sky. "What can you see?" said Two Flower to the dragon. "I see fighting on the top of the mountain," came the gentle reply. "See?" said Two Flower. "Harun's probably fighting for his life at this very moment." "The man you seek is talking to the dragon," said the dragon. "I hope we're in time. Dive now! Go low!" ordered Two Flower. "I think not," said Eleazar. Harun took the wine cup slowly. He grinned like a pumpkin. Then something like a green blur flashed across the arena, and Harun was gone. The wine cup hung momentarily in the air, then crashed down the steps. In the instant of enfolding Harun gently in his claws, Ninereeds the dragon had momentarily synchronized their bodily rhythms. The effect of this was to instantly transform a stationary and priapic Harun into a Harun moving sideways at 80 miles an hour with no ill effects whatsoever. Another effect was to cause Eleazar to scream with rage and summon her dragon. She leapt astride it, still naked, and snatched a crossbow from one of the guards. Then she was airborne, while the other dragon riders swarmed towards their own beasts. "You clowns!" Helen perched on Nyreed's foreclaws. "What did he say?" roared Rincewind as the dragon ripped its way through the air in the race for the heights. "Didn't hear!" bellowed Twoflower, his voice torn away by the gale. As the dragon banked slightly, he looked down. Far, far below, the shore of the Circle Sea stretched like a silver ribbon. Craning his neck, he squinted at the Wyrmberg and saw the swarm of creatures rising in pursuit. Nyreed's wings pounded and flicked the air away contemptuously. Thinner air, too. Twoflower's ear popped for the third time. "I could have been a lord, and you clowns had to go and..." Helen gasped as the chair drew the mighty. "In the air," muttered Rince. Blue lights appeared. Twoflower. Continued up. Astride air. Then what part of the gravity on the disc recovered from the surprise and claimed them. At that moment, Eleazar's dragon flashed by, and Harun landed heavily across its neck. Eleazar leant over and kissed him. This detail was lost to Rincewind as he dropped away with his arms still clasped around Twoflower's waist. The whole world was coming up towards them like a giant custard pie. "Wake up!" he shouted. "Dragons! Think of dragons!" No answer came from Twoflower. "Dragons!" thought Rincewind in a panic. He tried to concentrate his mind, tried to envisage a really lifelike dragon, but nothing happened. Clutching the inert Twoflower around the waist, Rincewind plunged towards the disc sea several hundred feet below. The cold waters roared up at him and sucked him down into their green embrace. A moment later, there was another splash as the luggage also hit the water, which gives a further indication, if one were needed, of just how resourceful Sapient Pearwood is. Later on, they used it as a raft. Close to the edge. It had been a long time in the making. Now it was almost completed, and the slaves hacked away at the last clay remnants of the mantle. The arch astronomer of Karul motioned lightly with his hand, and his bearers set the throne down in the shadow of the hull. Like a fish, he thought. A great flying fish. And of what seas? A fish that could swim through the seas of space that lie between the worlds. "Are the Chelonauts ready?" the arch astronomer asked. The master launch controller bustled forward. "Indeed, Your Prominence," he said. "How long to the doorway?" "The launch window," corrected the master launch controller carefully. 3 days, Your Prominence. Great Atuin's tail will be in an unmatched position." "Then all that remains," concluded the arch astronomer, "is to find the appropriate sacrifices." "If only you could navigate! If only you could steer!" A wave washed over the deck. Rincewind and Twoflower looked at each other. "I don't see how it's my fault," Twoflower said. "You were supposed to be on watch," snapped Rincewind. "I saved us from the slavers, remember?" said Twoflower. "I'd rather be a slave than a corpse," replied the wizard. He looked out to sea. There was definitely less horizon than there ought to be. Said Rincewind. "I said we're bound to strike land sooner or later," said Twoflower. "This current must go somewhere." "Look at the horizon," said Rincewind. Twoflower squinted. "Looks all right. Admittedly, there seems to be less than there usually is, but that's because of the rim fall," said Rincewind. "We're being carried over the edge of the world." There was a long silence, broken only by the lapping of the waves as the boat spun slowly in the current. It was already quite strong. "Would you like something to eat?" asked Two-Flower. He began to rummage through the bundle that he had tied to the rail out of the dam. "Don't you understand? We're going over the edge, goddammit!" "I wish I had my picture box," said Two-Flower, "but it's back on that slaver ship with the rest of the luggage, and you won't need luggage where we're going," said Rincewind. He stared moodily at a whale that had carelessly strayed into the Rimwood current and was now struggling against it. There was a line of white on the foreshortened horizon, and the wizard fancied he could hear a distant roaring. "What happens after a ship goes over the Rimfall?" asked Two-Flower. "Who knows?" "Well, in that case, perhaps we'll just sail on through space and land on another world." A faraway look came into the little man's eyes. "Like that?" Rincewind snorted. The sea around them seemed to be getting crowded. Rincewind noticed several tree trunks keeping station with them, and just below the surface the water was alive with fish of all sorts. He wondered what kind of life it would be, having to keep swimming all the time to stay exactly in the same place. Pretty similar to his own, he decided. He spotted a small green frog which was paddling desperately. He found a paddle and carefully extended it towards the little amphibian, which scrambled onto it gratefully. A moment later, a pair of jaws broke the water and snapped impotently at the spot where it had been swimming. The frog looked up at Rincewind from the cradle of his hands and then bit him thoughtfully on the thumb. Two-Flower giggled. Rincewind tucked the frog away in a pocket and pretended he hadn't heard. The roaring was louder now. A squid, bigger than anything Rincewind had seen before, broke the surface a few hundred yards away and thrashed madly with its tentacles before sinking away. A whole squadron of flying fish tumbled up in a cloud of rainbow-edged droplets and managed to gain a few yards before dropping back and being swept in an eddy. They were running out of world. Rincewind snatched at the masts as the roaring final end of everything raced towards them. "I must see this," said Two-Flower, half falling and half diving towards the prow. Something hard and unyielding smacked into the hull. A wash of cold sea cascaded over the deck. Rincewind was under several feet of boiling green water. He began to scream, and then the world became the deep, clanging purple colour of fading consciousness. He awoke with his mouth full of burning liquid. Two-Flower was looking down at him with an expression of deep concern. Rincewind groaned and sat up. This turned out to be a mistake. The edge of the world was a few feet away. Beyond it, at a level just below that of the lip of the endless Rimfall, was something altogether magical. Some 70 miles away, a dhow with the red sails typical of a freelance slaver drifted aimlessly through the velvety twilight. The crew were clustered on the foredeck. The captain, a thick-set man who wore the elbow turbans typical of a great Neff tribesman, had never before been really frightened. Now he was terrified. "I can't hear anything," he muttered. As if in answer, there came a furious pounding from the oar deck below their feet, and the sound of splintering wood. The crewmen drew together fearfully, brandishing axes and torches. They probably wouldn't dare to use them, even if the monster came rushing towards them. Before its terrible nature had been truly understood, several men had attacked it with axes, whereupon it had turned aside from its single-minded searching of the ship, and had either chased them overboard or had eaten them. The captain wasn't quite certain. The thing looked like an ordinary wooden sea chest, a bit larger than usual maybe, but not suspiciously so. It was just that the men who had been drowned overboard had probably been more fortunate than those it had caught. There had been teeth. Teeth like white wooden gravestones, and a tongue red as mahogany. This was the last time he rescued drowning men in mysterious circumstances. Slavery was better than sharks, wasn't it? And then they'd escaped in the dinghy, and when his sailors had investigated their big chest, how had they appeared in the middle of an untroubled ocean sitting on a big chest anyway? And it had bit... "Rafts ready, Lord," said the first mate. "Into the water with it," shouted the captain, "and get aboard, and fire the ship!" What the hell is that? Demanded Rincewind. It is the Rimbo, said a voice immediately behind his left ear. The voice was accompanied by a gust of cold, fishy breath. Two-Flower, he said. Yes? If I turn around, what will I see? His name is Tethys. He says he's a sea troll. This is his boat. He rescued us, explained Two-Flower. Will you look round now? Not just at the moment, thank you. So, why aren't we going over the edge then? Asked Rincewind with glassy calmness. Because your boat hits the circumfence, said the voice behind him. The circumfence? Yes, it runs along the edge of the world. Ah, you mean the circumference, said Rincewind. The circumference makes the edge of things. So does the circumfence, said the troll. He means this, said Two-Flower, pointing. Upwards of the boat was a rope suspended a few feet above the surface of the white water. The boat was attached to it, moored yet mobile, by a complicated arrangement of pulleys and wheels. They ran along the rope as the unseen rower propelled the craft along the very lip of the rimfall. That explained one mystery, but what supported the rope? Rincewind peered along its length and saw a stout wooden post sticking up out of the water a few yards ahead. As he watched, the boat neared it and then passed it, the little wheels clacking neatly around it in a groove obviously cut for the purpose. Rincewind also noticed that smaller ropes hung down from the main rope at intervals of a yard or so. Behind him, the sea troll said, Up ahead is my house. We will talk more when we are there. Now I must row. Rincewind looked at the Rimbo, which hung in the mists beyond the edge of the world, appearing only at morning and evening, when the light of the disk's little orbiting sun shone past the massive bulk of Great Artuin the World Turtle and struck the disk's magical field at exactly the right angle. A double rainbow coruscated into being. Close into the lip of the rimfall were the 7 lesser colours, sparkling and dancing in the spray of the dying seas. But they were pale in comparison to the wider band that floated beyond them, not deigning to share the same spectrum. It was the king colour, of which all the lesser colours are merely partial and wishy-washy reflections. It was October, the colour of magic. It was alive and glowing and vibrant, and it was the undisputed pigment of the imagination, because wherever it appeared, it was a sign that mere matter was a servant of the powers of the magical mind. It was enchantment itself. Rincewind always thought it looked a sort of greenish purple. After a while, a small speck on the rim of the world resolved itself into an eot or crag, so perilously perched that the waters of the fall swirled around it at the start of their long drop. A driftwood shanty had been built. Rincewind saw on a number of iron stakes and actually passed through the shack by a small round window. A floating stockade had been built out of rough timber on the Hubbard side of the island. It contained 1 or 2 hulks and quite a large amount of floating wood in the form of planks, balks, and even whole tree trunks. The boat slid up against a small jetty. The wizard and Two-Flower scrambled onto the planking, and for the first time, Rincewind saw the troll. Instead of the betentacled monstrosity he'd been expecting, he found himself looking at a rather squat but not particularly ugly old man, apparently composed of water and very little else. The troll was a pleasant translucent blue colour. As Rincewind stared, a small shoal of silvery fish flashed across his chest. Two-Flower and Rincewind followed him into the hut. The troll lit a couple of lamps and poured 2 cups of green liquid from the tall pitcher. In the dim light, he appeared to phosphoresce in the manner of warm seas on velvety summer nights. Rincewind reached for a cup and looked at the green pool shimmering inside it. He drank. His mouth twisted. He whimpered a little. One of his legs came up convulsively and caught him painfully in the chest. Two-Flower swirled his own drink thoughtfully while he considered the flavour. Livid, he said. Certainly. western plantations in Reid province, yes? May I ask how you came by it? All things drift into the circumference in time. My job is to recover the flotsam, timber, of course, and ships, barrels of wine, bales of cotton. Light dawned inside Rincewind's head. It's a net, isn't it? You've got a net right on the edge of the sea. The circumference, muttered the Troll, ripple flying across his chest. You have to be very strong, Rincewind said. It is. It could be extended for a couple of miles if you found enough rocks and things, said the wizard. 10,000 of miles. I just patrolled this lead. That's a third of the way around the disk. Tethys told them about the ancient and wise kingdom of Karul, which had constructed the circumference several centuries before, and about the 7 navies that patrolled it constantly to keep it in repair and bring its salvage back to Karul, and about the way in which sailors marooned on the circumference were turned into slaves and usually had their tongues cut out. I won't be a slave, said Rincewind. I'd jump over the edge first. Would you, though? Asked the Troll. One blue arm caught the wizard around the waist. A moment later, the Troll was striding out of the shack with Rincewind gripped carelessly in one fist. He didn't stop until he came to the rimwood edge of the island. Rincewind squealed. Look, commanded the Troll. Rincewind looked. In front of him was a soft black night whose mist-muted stars glowed peacefully, but his eyes turned downwards, drawn by some irresistible fascination. On either side, 2 glittering curtains of water hurtled towards infinity as the sea swept around the island on its way to the long fall, bathed in the golden underworld light. Huge shadows grew out of that light, like pillars supporting the roof of the universe. Hundreds of miles below him, the wizard made out the shape of something. The edge of something. The head of an elephant as big as a reasonably sized continent. Below the elephant, Rincewind swallowed and tried not to think. Below the elephant, there was the distant, painful disk of the sun, and sweeping slowly past it was something that, for all its city-sized scales, its crater pocks, its lunar cragginess, was indubitably a flipper. Shall I let go? Suggested the Troll. Nah, said Rincewind. Tethys stepped back and allowed Rincewind to fling himself onto the ground. Twoflower strolled up to the rim and peered over. Fantastic, he said. If only I had my picture box. What else is down there? A bell jangled in the darkness. They returned to the hut. Tethys strode across the creaking floor to the complicated devices of levers, strings and bells that was mounted on the circumfence's topmost strand, where it passed through the hut. The bell rang again, and then started to clang away in an odd, jerky rhythm for several minutes. The Troll stood with his ear pressed close to it. When it stopped, he turned slowly and looked at them with a worried frown. You're more important than I thought, he said. You're not to wait for the salvage fleet. You're to be collected by a flyer. He shrugged. And I hadn't even sent a message that you're here yet. I wonder how... He picked up a large mallet that hung on a pillar beside the bell and used it to tap out a brief carillon. That'll be passed from Lengthman to Lengthman all the way back to Karul, he said. Marvellous, really, isn't it? The lens skimming towards the island was perhaps 20 feet across and totally transparent. Sitting around its circumference were a large number of black-robed men, each one strapped securely to the disc by a leather harness, and each one staring down at the waves with an expression so tormented, so agonizing, that the transparent lens seemed to be ringed with gargoyles. What is it? Said Twoflower. Well, the lens itself would have been created by Fresnel's wonderful concentrator, said Rincewind authoritatively. Those wizards on it must all be gifted hydrophobes. You mean they hate water? Said Twoflower. They really loathe it. That's what keeps the lens up in the air. The flyer halted a few yards hubward of the island, throwing up a sheet of spray. It hung there, spinning slowly. A hooded figure standing by the stubby pillar at the exact centre of the lens beckoned to them. "You'd better wade out," said the troll. The hooded figure reached down with one hand and released a rope ladder. In its other hand, it held a silver rod, which had about it the unmistakable air of something designed for killing people. Rincewind's first impression was reinforced when the...
Well, I'm soon home, so I'm turning off the stream. See you later, maybe. I might stream Minecraft while I'm listening to this audio, or what do you call it, audio book once more, because there are some parts I want to listen to properly when I